Real JP Multimedia, proud sponsor of the Nerdball podcast. Here to help you with all things audio, video, graphics, photo, web design. From weddings to real estate, commercial business to private use, we offer a big variety of services for almost any budget. And if we can't do it, we will find someone who can. Find us at realjp.com. That's REELJP.com. Real JP Multimedia.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Doug Hinebaugh, also known as the Dougiefresh, and welcome to the Nerdball podcast.
This is the Nerdball podcast with Lorenzo Melcher.
That was so good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Doug, thanks for coming on the podcast. I feel like I see you all the time because you're just out and about in the Metro Parks taking pictures, man.
Yeah, well, the Metro Parks they were up there with the first people in Toledo that really kind of, gave me some run with my photos.
Okay.
The way that COVID worked out, I was in what I'd hoped was my last printing job. I used to run printing presses for over 20 years, big school bus size printing presses. And I was working at Metzger's, and I got laid off during COVID, and my job didn't come back. And I'm not very good at sitting around. COVID was never going to work for me.
Yeah.
But I can't go to the mall, or I can't go to the movies, or I can't do all this stuff, but I could go outside. And so I did that.
Yeah.
And that's when all my time started being spent in the Metro Parks, and I take my cameras and my dog with me everywhere, and it turned into that.
Yeah.
And they Connect Toledo and Metro Parks, a few other organizations kind of really took notice of me, and it's turned into what you see. So I mean, I'd be doing what I'm doing out in the Metro Parks even if it hadn't turned into an opportunity for me, just because I love it, and I've been all over this country, and it's pretty special what we have right here.
Do you have like a website or anything, or is it just your Instagram that people can see?
I do. It's and I'm actually have a new one that's about to launch.
Okay.
I'm upgrading everything, including my own image. So my new website will be www.dougiefreshphoto.com.
Okay.
The one that exists right now is www.dougiefreshphotography.com.
Okay.
Now, what's goofy about that is, well, I was so excited when I first started this. I went and bought the domain, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's available.
Yeah.
I didn't put any more thought into it than that. The first time I texted somebody my address or my website, the M on .com goes down to a second line because it was one, and I was like, that is the most annoying thing in the world. So 2 years now, I suppose, a little over that, I've been going with that, and so I found out how to get it shortened down and do all of that. So we're rebranding and
awesome.
Yeah.
So is that new website up yet, or is that
no? It'll be coming up pretty soon. I have a friend in Chicago that her and her husband do all of my branding stuff. I mean, I put some work into this.
Yeah,
and
good.
So she built my first website, and her and her husband, who have now teamed up, are building my second one. So she has been developing that for the past month, and she wanted to present it to me last week, and she didn't know I was on my trip. I was like, do we have to do this today? So she's been waiting for me to get back to do it, and it'll probably be coming this week.
All right, I'll make sure to put it in the show notes then too. People can click on it right from the podcast page.
Yeah, man,
so
I appreciate it.
So how did this all get started? Did you grow up around here? Are you from here?
Yeah,
Toledo?
I'm from here. I spent my first 7 years in Point Place, so that's where my OG Toledo cred comes from.
Yeah.
My parents moved us out to Perrysburg Township, and that's where I ended up going to high school. So when you put this address in the messenger, I was like, I know exactly where that's at, because one of my first jobs was right over there at Churchill's.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I was
okay.
a bagger, and then I ended up working in the video department. It was also the first job I got fired from. Yeah,
I feel like if you're a kid, it has to be just not showing up anymore.
No, that was actually, and I don't know how deep you want to get into it, but that was the beginnings of what ended up being my alcohol problem that lasted for 20 years. But I had brought something in with me because I was going to go to a party after that and put it in the refrigerator, wrapped up back in the video department.
Yeah.
And one of the managers from up front, for some reason, was in that refrigerator and saw it. And the next day I walked in and I got my first lesson on this is why you're not going to be able to be responsible for this with this. And you're going to have to take a lot more lumps to figure it out because I didn't get it then.
How old were you?
17.
17. Yeah. Yeah. And whenever people bring up stuff like that, I let, and so I said it a lot in the podcast. My mom is a recovering alcoholic. I think she's been sober. Gosh, she's been sober. It's got to be close to, I don't know, 18 years, something like that.
Congratulations to her. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So she actually has her anniversary coming up at her AA group on the 17th. So I'm going to go to that with her in the morning because then we're speaking at Perrysburg High School later that day. They have a personal development day. It's a diverse learners day. So we're speaking about alcoholism and drug use in families and stuff to the staff.
Well, send them my love. I know how hard that is. And May 9th coming up this year will be 7 years for me without a drop. It changed my life.
Yeah?
And my biggest regret in my world is not having figured it out sooner.
Yeah. I know for me, I was young when she was drinking and both my parents partied, but I was young. So as a kid, you're just like, well, this is just how life is. And then as you get older, you realize like, oh, that's not normal for everybody.
No, that's who I learned it from, my parents. And, my mom, she got wise by the time I was out of high school herself, but my dad was not the other way. And he's kind of the one that, made it, normalized it and got me into it. And, that's, I don't know what would have changed him, but he passed away last year, about a week before Father's Day. Thanks a lot. Yeah. But seeing the way that his path kind of dead ended, bad pun, but really reaffirmed what I have done for myself.
Yeah.
And, like I said, he's the one that kind of got me started. And, when I was living in Houston before I ever moved back to Toledo, I found out that he was living in the Cherry Street Mission.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, talk about fall from grace, a pillar of Perrysburg community. He helped out with the schools. He was a coach. He was a father. He was a business owner, a homeowner. He checked every box and did it right until he didn't.
Yeah.
And, to fall that far. And that was my glimpse into my future. I was looking in the mirror down in Houston thinking, in 26 years, that is you if you don't do something.
Was that kind of the thing that decided
it was
for you?
It was 50-50 between that and the daily guilt I got from, honestly, being a bad dog dad. I worked second shift, and I would, get off of work at 11 o'clock and come home and straight to fixing a drink, and I would, tell the dog, okay, well, we're not going to go for a walk tonight. We'll go in the morning.
Oh, wow.
And then, I didn't have to work till 2 o'clock or so, but I'd sleep till 11 o'clock, and I'd wake up feeling like garbage, and I'd tell her, hey, we'll do it after work. And then day after day, month after month, and I owed her more than that. I owed me more than that.
Yeah, yeah.
And, all of that just kind of came to a head, and it was about 20 years of a really progressive problem that came to a head, and I had to end it, and successfly did. And like I said, it meant everything. It changed everything.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome, man. As someone who's
Thank you.
Seen my mom go through it, and then my brother just never shaken it, and ultimately he overdosed, and
I'm so sorry.
Thanks. He just never got out of it. So I saw both ends of it, and I was always worried for myself, like. Even to this day, I'm still like, what am I addicted to? Because I feel like it's just something like in our genes. Because my grandma loved gambling, and that was just her thing. She just, it was never to the point where like she got in trouble with it or did too much or whatever. But she just loved to do it. And I'm always like, sometimes I get too hyper focused on like what is my thing or what am I like. I'm watching out for certain things or this or that.
Well, it's good you're cognizant, and I think just about anything can be okay in moderation. It's just for some of us, moderation's not possible in some arenas, and I hope you don't run into that because that would be a lot easier for your life. But if you do, be aware and. You got it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it.
You seem like you've got a great support system and everything,
sure.
And that's something I didn't have. I had isolated myself. I found myself living in Houston where I thought that was such a great idea for whatever my future held. And then I realized when I really needed some people, I was 1,000 miles away from everything that mattered to me, and I was lost.
Did that help? Is that what made you move back too? Part of that?
Like, that was feeling? That was part of it. I knew that the printing industry had not been good for me. You need to be at a place a year before you can get a 401k started.
Oh, wow.
And I had 20 plus years of lasting about a year at places where I'd keep getting, I got laid off over a dozen times.
Really?
And you start the new place and you're the new guy. So when they have a bad couple quarters, you're the first one to go.
Yeah.
And it was over and over. And I was like, I'm not getting anywhere with this. It doesn't matter how good I am at it. I didn't do this the right way. I should have stayed at one of those places in Toledo that I started at and, had put 25 years into the same place. That wasn't my path. I can't change that. Yeah. But I knew I wanted to do something else. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I had to do something, and Toledo made the most sense. It was, I was actually kind of looking at Columbus or Detroit, but in general, I was looking back at the area because I figured I'd be close enough to have somewhat of a support system, some familiarity with my surroundings, and a network to build. I was prepared to, take $15 an hour to start over at a new career and be a grunt and prove to people I can work my way up. I'm smart. I'm a different person than you ever knew, and I got something to give.
Yeah.
And the photography thing was just a hobby. That was something that I started when I was down in Houston taking cell phone photos at a car show down there.
Oh, wow.
It's a big car show. Like you may have heard of Cars and Coffee before. They call theirs Coffee and Cars down there. Just
really?
A little different. But it was at a mall once a month, first Saturday of the month, right by my apartment. And this was amazing. As a kid who grew up with posters of Lamborghinis and Ferraris and stuff on my walls, getting to see just rows and rows of these and Bugattis and Paganis and all these $1 million cars.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sick. And so I'm taking these photos with my cell phone, just something to keep. I was looking for activities that were, clean, that weren't going to, tempt me to go grab a drink. So I was that was really the start of me doing stuff outdoors and finding things like that. Which would eventually morph into parks and all of that. But I just had to keep looking. I had this curiosity. And there was a station down there. We've got 13 ABC up here. Houston has ABC 13. And I'd been posting my photos on Reddit and Imager. And they had seen them and asked, could we put these photos up, your whole album on our website? And I was tickled. I was like, go. I was like, go for it. That was, my first exposure to anything.
Yeah.
And my mom and sister saw that back in Charlottesville, Virginia. And they wanted to keep me on a good path, and they thought he's got something here, and so they bought me my first camera 5 Christmases ago.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that just kind of tailed up here with me as a hobby until it wasn't.
Yeah,
and
that's always like you get affirmation from outside of you, like you're like doing this thing because it's fun, or in your case it's helping you, maybe helping you survive, just being clean, and then to get from someone else, like get outside and like, oh, they realize this too and are helping me. I mean, my wife, I think last Christmas or maybe 2 Christmases ago, bought me the tripod that the camera's on right now. Like, cause she knows like this is a hobby. This is what I want to do. I'm going to help him do this thing. Right?
Yeah.
So that like it just makes me feel better. I'm assuming like, oh, they bought me a camera. Then I know I'm doing this for fun, but they also see like this is awesome too.
Did you feel maybe even a little bit of accountability? Like,
boy,
they invested in this. I better do something with it.
Yeah, it is, and it did. It sat in a box for like 3 months.
That was my next question. Were you scared of it at first because you didn't know exactly what to do with it?
Yeah, because I didn't know how to edit video. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. I had a camera, and then even in my brain, I'm like, I don't even know if my camera works on this tripod. Like all these things. So it just sat there, and then I did an episode. I think what kicked it off was I did a Zoom episode. I'm like, okay, those are easy to edit. I'll put those on YouTube. My first ones were Zoom during COVID. So this is what, kind of toward the tail end of it. And then I set up the video camera for my first time. I'm like, well, I'm just going to try it and we'll see what happens, And, it took some while to figure out how to edit and everything. And I'm getting pretty good at it now. It still takes some time. But yeah, at first it was, I don't know if I could do this. But it was in the back of my mind, like you said, like, well, she bought it for me. I need to use it because it was a gift and she wants me to do something with it.
My road trip that Christmas that I got that camera on the way back from Charlottesville was also a guilt trip because I didn't take a single picture. I drove from Charlottesville, Virginia back to Houston, all along the Gulf Coast. Imagine all those amazing things to see. And I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what mode to put it in. I was like, I'll figure this out when I get back and have some more time. And, thank God I did, man. Yeah. Thank God.
That's it. Like you said, it's intimidating, and I'm glad it's working out. For
Ditto,
me and
right
for
back
you,
at you.
Yeah. So it's awesome, man. So you grew up in Perrysburg. I want to go back here a little bit. You grew up in Perrysburg, you said?
Yeah.
You went to Perrysburg High School, everything.
Yeah, I was a St. Rose kid to start.
Oh, were you? Okay.
And I've always been kind of didn't want to do what people told me to do,
Yeah.
and I was not into the Catholic school thing, and so 6th grade I really started pushing, and my mom said, well, you're going to get confirmed, but I'll let you go to the junior high, but you got to keep your grades up, things like that. So I went to Perrysburg Junior High, and the grades were all right, and I think I got a pass because my sister, who was a straight A student, was like, well, I want to go to the junior high too. So there was no sending me back after she went. So I was like, okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I had a lot of friends that went to the junior high that had gone to St. Rose through 6th grade, or just being a part of, the recreational leagues around Perrysburg, playing baseball over there, Little League baseball and stuff like that. I was on Jimmy Leland's nephew's team for years. And he'd come out every once in a while to our practices and stuff. And I mean, man, that blew our mind having a major league manager right there. Everybody's out there, got their game face on, like, make sure Jimmy's paying attention to me, but
That's funny.
yeah, so it, and I went to high school here. I didn't excel in really anything other than being sociable and probably a little bit of a troublemaker. And
Were you into photography then at all?
I did take 2 semesters of photography at Perrysburg High School.
Okay.
That was old school film stuff. Used a Canon AE1 that I still own, and my uncle is a professional photographer, so he kind of said, "Oh, well, here I'll hook you up with some equipment," and I'll do. My sister did the same thing, but it kind of died right after that. I mean, it was years of maybe a disposable camera, if you remember. You're a little younger than me, but if you remember those things, I'd get one of those for an event or something. But other than that, it really trailed off until cell phones started having cameras on them, and it was just screwing around with that until I got to Houston, and there was something about those cars, and me having all this newfound curiosity that I wasn't just sitting around in my apartment, waiting to pass out. I was like, what's this world got? I want to go see it.
Yeah. Those disposable cameras, I think the last time I used those, we put those at each table of our wedding reception.
That is such a fantastic idea, and I don't do weddings as far as photography goes, but that's something that I've seen at quite a few of them, and I'm like, what a great idea.
Yeah,
So.
and we did not get rid of one. If it was super dark, super whatever, they're all in one album, and every once in a while we'll look through them. And it's funny because Steve Stockford, TBG, right? He came, so he gave me my first landscaping job when I was at Owens. I think it was like 13 years ago, 14 years ago. So I worked with him that long ago, and he
Was that before you were both with the Parks?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
So he owned a landscape company called Premier Gardening Services with with a woman named Margie Black. They gave me my first job, and he came to our wedding with his kids. His son's now a senior in high school. They're both kids were real little, and I sent him some pictures a couple months ago of his kids at our wedding, and he goes, "Man, that was a long time ago." I said, "I know." So we knew each other. I mean, it was just that 1 year, and then I didn't even realize he worked at the Parks until I applied for a job 3 years ago.
What did you apply for? Start with.
It was so I got a job as park maintenance at Providence. But I also applied for a job at TBG, but the pay difference was like $5 an hour to be a park maintenance. So I ended up at Providence for 8 months until I got to Pearson after that. But it's been awesome there, man. It's I just knew the Metro Parks as Wildwood, and that was pretty much it because I went to Catholic school. I went to Our Lady of Lourdes till 8th grade, from kindergarten to 8th grade, and we would have all our like cross country practices and run, soccer, like everything was at Wildwood. And we'd go there, and that's the only park I knew. I didn't even know about Providence existed until I went the day before I started. Is the first time I was there, and just all these different parks, man. It's amazing.
It is, and I had the same thing because the first time around in Toledo, I stayed here through age 30 before I moved away for 12 years, and we can chat about that later if you want. But I was a whole different person the first time. I was the party kid, and I was going out to clubs, and my day didn't start until it got dark, basically. And so I didn't delve into any of that. I remember maybe going on a field trip to the dunes at Oak Openings back in the day, and I think I knew of Side Cut because I'm a Perrysburg kid, and that was what was on the other side of the river from Buttonwood. Other than that, that was my entire experience with any of that stuff until, I'm almost 40 years old, and I moved back here. And so I think that's been one of the things that's really resonated with a lot of people in my photography and my experience is that it almost seems like this is the first time I'm seeing some of this stuff because it honestly is.
Yeah.
A couple years ago when Ben Morales first took me out, I'm not sure if you know him. He's a local photographer. He works for Heart Inc. And fantastic guy. He's been a great friend and a kind of a mentor to me. And he took me out to the Interurban Bridge at Roche de Boeuf. And we had a beautiful sunrise and, had to go down this crazy path that they told us not to go down. And, it was a really neat experience. And it blew my mind that was sitting there my whole life. And I lived right across the river basically from it for 30 years and had no clue it existed.
Yeah. Yeah, we would drive. I had a friend who lived on River Road, and we'd go visit other people in Waterville, and we would drive over that bridge. Now it's a brand new bridge now with the cul-de-sac and everything, or not a cul-de-sac, a roundabout. But the same thing, like as kids, you're just like doing these things. It's very similar to when as 8th graders we went to Washington D.C. and I would love to go back as an adult.
We did that.
So like it's because it's so different when you're an adult. You appreciate it more. And you
you haven't been back as an adult?
No, I haven't.
Well, I lived in Charlottesville, Virginia for 4 years. That
Yeah.
was the first place I moved away from Toledo back in
okay.
2007, and that was. I knew I wanted more big city right away because that Charlottesville was too small, but DC was where I went up to quite a bit.
did
So
you?
I've
Okay.
spent a lot of time there,
Yeah.
and it's just as cool as an adult. All that stuff you see on TV and on your money and all
Yeah.
that, it's real and it's very beautiful. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of history behind it. Other than the traffic and the way this city's laid out, I think it's worse than Manhattan. But it's a really neat place to visit, and I highly recommend going back.
Yeah, I want to, and I think, and when my kids get older, it's something I would do. But again, like as 8th graders, you're just there because your parents paid for you to go on this bus and go on a trip, and you just want to hang out with your buddies, and you're not paying attention.
They could have been going to Poughkeepsie. And I would have been like, throw me on that bus. I'm getting out of here for a while.
Did you go to college after high school?
I did. I went to, I toured all the, all the colleges in the area.
Sure.
Didn't do well at any of them, but
That was me too.
I started at Bowling Green for a year and then went to Owens for a couple years and then went to UT for a year. It was the winter semester of 1999, I think was the last time I went.
Okay.
I didn't finish and it was a waste. I shouldn't have gone. I don't think I really look back and I wish somebody, a guidance counselor, a teacher, my parents, somebody would have said, you can't even articulate a reason why you want to go. So why are you going to go get yourself into debt and do all of this? Nobody had that talk with me. I'm from Perrysburg. Like you either, once you graduate high school, you either go get a job at the factory and get married or you go to college.
Yeah.
That was in 1995 when I graduated. Those were the options.
In 2003, when I graduated, those were the options.
Yeah.
And still now, it's getting a lot less because I know a lot of people in the schools now, and I coach for Perrysburg. So one thing I do tell kids a lot, one of the things I like to do is during senior year, I talk to seniors, ask them what they're doing or this or that, and I explain to them, my path is very similar to yours. Went to BG, they told me not to come back. Went to Owens, they told me not to come back. Tried BG again. Again, they said, no, you're not even showing up to class. Why are you coming here? Finally, I graduated from Owens when I was 24. But I tell kids the same thing. Like, I wasn't ready. And again, nobody really said, like, why are you doing this? I might even just taken one person and be like, hey, why are you going? And I would have been like, well, I just want to hang out with my friends. Well, you can do that for free. Like, you don't have to pay to go to school or not, in my case.
Perrysburg was 15 minutes away from Bowling Green. And
Yeah.
I wasn't able to wrap my head around that. And I just, that was a lot of years of doing what I was told or doing what I thought everybody else wanted me to do or what everybody else wanted to see and not being my own person. And, even after I graduated high school and moved out and had that opportunity at my own life, it took me so long. And that's where the alcohol didn't help because I didn't know who I was for so long. I had no purpose. I figured, well, I can run printing presses, so I'm good at something. So let's just stick with this, even though it wasn't good for me. And it didn't have much of a personality besides being a jokester who, went to work and partied outside of it. I mean,
yeah. So you've mentioned printing presses several times. Is that something you did like around college age? Like, and you've done it for a while?
It's been a part of my whole life. Hickory Farms, which is, everybody probably remembers it from the malls and stuff, the cheese and the sausage and stuff. Well, they were based out of Maumee, right over there by where the Berry Bagels is over there. UPS,
Yes.
Dussel, and Holland Perrysburg or whatever.
Actually, I think that was one of the companies we did landscaping for when I worked with Steve.
I wouldn't
think
doubt it. Yeah, they had a really big
commercial
lawn over
property we
there.
had. Yeah.
Yeah, so they did all of their own printing in-house in the 70s and through most of the 80s.
Okay.
So the labels, the posters that would be up in the stores, all of that stuff. And my dad was the foreman in that shop. So he had, been around it for years since I was born. And then Hickory Farms decided, like a lot of companies, that they were going to start farming it out to a bigger printing company because that was a department that they didn't want the overhead for. He decided to buy a bunch of their equipment, and he started a place called Arrowhead Printing. So that's what he was doing basically through my high school years.
Okay.
Everybody there, don't get into printing. Stay in school. I even had those people telling me, go to college. And I didn't listen. I never do.
Sure.
And so when after my first not good year at BG, my parents were going to get a divorce, kind of stunk on their 25th year of, being
wow.
married.
Yeah.
So, but they said, well, hey, you're more than welcome to keep going back to school. We're just not going to help pay for it anymore. So I felt I was still supposed to go, and I needed a job. So my dad got me one at a place over on the east side called Mercury Printing, and I started just hand folding things and gluing things and doing, just kind of grunt work.
Sure.
And I was already dissatisfied within the first month. And there was an opening for a helper running a printing press. A lot of them are 2 or 3 man people that takes to run these machines. And it was on second shift, but I was like, I don't care. Get me off of doing this stuff. And it was $2 more an hour. So I started doing that, and that's when things started rolling. And I found I had an aptitude for it. I was really good at it. There were other, press assistants that were there that had a whole lot of experience. That it didn't take long till I was running circles around them and getting invited up to the, the other end of the press that I worked on to start learning that, because, the people that I worked with and the bosses saw potential. And one thing, and I kind of mentioned it before about the job hopping thing, is, I was very impatient back then, and I wanted it now. I wanted that raise. I wanted that opportunity to run the next machine, the bigger machine, because it had, a higher pay scale. It had, better work, better hours, whatever it might have been.
Yeah.
And that took me, I wasn't going to wait for old Jim to retire. Or wait for, well, if the company has a good couple years, we might buy a new press eventually. No, I didn't have time for that.
So that's when you were just
I started hopping, and, I can get, you'll hire me for that job that they don't have open over here for $3 more an hour than I'm making? Cool, I did that. But that started that whole thing where, you go into that next interview and, wow, it looks like you've worked a lot of places. And then it turns into the printing industry started really going down with the, the age of the internet taking off, and it just progressively got worse. And that just became a self-fulfilling prophecy over and over again. And it's funny, nowadays I have people that, the last resume I had, I don't need a resume ever again from now, considering what I do.
Yeah.
But I had people looking at it like, wow, you really have a well-rounded experience. And I was like, wait a second, where was this attitude 15 years ago? Because this was a liability at that point. So I stuck around in that industry, and I first moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, and I worked at a place down there for the whole 4 years I was there.
That was a printing press job too?
Yep.
Okay.
And then I moved to Chicago after that, because I think I told you when I went down there, that was the reason I was going to D.C. Charlottesville was too small for me. So when I realized it wasn't working out down there, I was like, well, I can go anywhere. Let's do the big city. And I'd grown up going out to Chicago. I was a rave kid, went out there to party and stuff. And so I
never, sorry to interrupt, but my brother liked raves too. That was never my jam. Like, I can listen to EDM music, I can listen to music, but doing that thing, he would tell me about it. I was like, that doesn't sound like fun at all.
It's changed a lot over the years, and I don't think I'd enjoy what the new stuff is, but the old stuff back then, the dirty underground stuff, warehouses that were closed down that somebody had to roll up a generator to. So I mean, it was illegal. It was fun, man.
Yeah.
It was special. You kind of knew you were in one of those eras and in the moment that is never going to happen again. So with all those, those wistful ideas of, all the good times I had in Chicago, I moved out there. And that's where the printing industry really started to become a liability, because all the good jobs were out in the burbs, and I grew up in Perrysburg. I didn't move to Illinois to live in Perrysburg. I wanted to live in the city. And so it started a real cycle of, multiple jobs and never got anywhere, and I was struggling. And that's when I was, looking for something different again. And I had some friends down in Houston that had invited me to move down there years before. They were like, we're still offering, we've got a nice house. You can come get your start here.
Okay.
And I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
So that's when I went down there. And
So were you at a point where you're like not going to have a place to live? Like you just...
it was close,
Okay.
and I was on unemployment. I'll be honest. I mean, that was the first time in my life I ever asked the government for anything. I went and applied for, food stamps and I got turned down because I made too much on unemployment.
Oh, really?
And well, it really, really left me feeling kind of, lonely and empty. Like I've got no help right now. Like they basically told me, if it gets worse, come back. Like I don't want it to get worse.
Yeah.
I
Trying
got to
to
do
stop it
something.
here.
Yeah, I'm sitting there drowning.
Yeah.
And, I wasn't helping myself because, still drinking, still doing dumb stuff. And, that carried over even into the days when I was, not actually under the influence, but I still wasn't making good decisions. My head wasn't in the right spot. And, Houston seemed like a great idea. And I look back on it now, and it was a great idea because that's where I found myself, my sobriety, my everything. And, I'll always be grateful to that city. That was the first place I went on my road trip too.
Oh, did you? Okay. When you went down to Houston, you lived with some friends. Was it another printing press job that you got?
It was. I had two of them down there, and
wow, okay.
they were both with what I would otherwise call decent companies. One of the things that goes with the printing industry right now is a lot of places don't have benefits. They don't have insurance. They don't have 401k. They may pay you a little higher in the hourly, but and that was tough for me. So the first one that I had down there, I didn't get any of that stuff. So I'm grinding, but I can't take care of myself, things like that. And that was kind of a pain. So I ended up getting a second one, which was actually working on like digital copiers and things like that. So it was a little bit more like of a modern quick print style. They had a few small presses that I would run, but I ended up getting laid off from that one. Surprise. And even though I was willing, I was throwing resumes out everywhere down there. And I was sober at this time. And I was willing to move to San Antonio or Austin. Maybe not so much Dallas. Dallas and Houston hate each other, and I don't know, maybe it rubbed off on me a little bit, but I, for some reason, didn't want to go there. Nobody called. Nobody anything. And that's where this whole, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
It's all... Yeah, Houston was the big turning point.
That's good, man. That's where my dad's family's from.
Oh, nice.
Between San Antonio and Houston, it's a little town called Welder. Real small.
I don't even know if I've seen a sign for that one off the highway.
No, my dad said it was a huge town, 7 gas stations, but they built I-10 and it just pretty much bypassed it.
Yeah.
So all my family still lives there or surrounding areas.
Do you go down there and visit?
We're actually going in April.
Oh, cool.
My kids are 11 and 8. They've never been down there.
Neat.
We planned to go. We had this whole week trip. We're going to go, and then that's when COVID hit, and we had to cancel. So we're all, my whole family, my dad and my mom and my youngest sister all got a house down there to rent, and then my other sister and her husband and kids are going down there too. So it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, my wife.
And their kids get to see a Buc-ee's years before I ever got to. Man, that place is the greatest.
People love Buc-ee's. I actually was out to dinner. We went to Sidelines in Perrysburg, and a woman in the restaurant had a Buc-ee's hoodie on. I think it's so funny. But there's a couple things I always like going to those. I go to Whataburger. My dad, that was one thing my parents.
I did that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Honey butter chicken biscuit. Good, it's so good.
My dad we would always load up in a van every Christmas, every winter break, and we'd drive down there as little kids. So we would go down there quite a bit. I haven't been back. That's had to be over 6 years, I think, maybe 5, something like that. But the past 3 times I've gone back, it's just for funerals. I haven't been able to go back just
for a joyous visit.
Yeah. So
good. I hope you have that.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. So I do. My dad's down there now. Actually, he's coming. He comes back. I think tomorrow. But he only goes in the winter. He grew up there and he can't handle the heat.
Smart man.
So, yeah.
Oh, I'm angling for the snowbird thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's been retired for a while, and he'll go down about 3 times a year to visit and help. And it's getting less and less time. Like before, it was like, all right, I'm gonna be gone for 2.5 months, and now I think this past time we went, it was like a month or something. You know, it just he misses everything back here when he's down there. You know, my mom and my kids are doing things that he doesn't get to see all the time, so lessons time. But yeah, we're looking forward to it. I'm pretty excited. So
I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
I love Texas.
yeah, it's awesome, man. And I don't know how my kids are gonna react, but I'm sure they're gonna have a blast too. We got a lot of other stuff planned and visiting family.
Get them a couple of disposable cameras.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. I never thought about that. Like, cause my son has a phone now. My daughter has a watch, but I think just to see those cameras, can you buy this?
You can.
Yeah?
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of a fun exercise too, because unlike, digital cameras, you're really limited on, you might have 24 shots and you got to make them count.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
They're going to be
it
done
makes
in
you
10
not want to
minutes.
take that they could be lazy about it and just blast through
Yeah.
them, or be smart about it and save it for the right moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we'll get a couple. That's a good idea. Because it'd be nice to tell them, like, here's these cameras, here's how you use them. Take the photos whenever you want, but to kind of get their view of like what they enjoy from the vacation, as opposed to just like our pictures. That's a good idea. So you're in Houston. We talked about you finding that car show and really getting sober and figuring out what you want to do really. How long were you in Houston before you decided to move back up here?
I was down there for 4 years. I had this 4-year thing going, which it just worked out like this. It wasn't like 4 years, I got to tuck tail to the next place. But I was in Charlottesville for 4 years, Chicago for 4 years, Houston for 4 years. And I think I just gave a big old stinker, to everybody that was saying when my 4 years in Toledo came, like, where are you going? And I was like, I'm not going anywhere. So we're pushing towards 4.5 years now. And
Nice. Okay.
Like I said, I'm in it for the long haul here,
Yeah.
and I'd love to go winter somewhere else. But for the most part, I love it, and this area has been great to me. I couldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if I weren't here. Like I think about this all the time. Like if I would have even getting as interested in Houston into photography and kind of becoming the personality that I've become to go along with all of this, I didn't have a network down there. I didn't have, the skill would have been one thing, getting experience would have been one thing, but I wouldn't have known where to start. And I think I might still be spinning my wheels and probably being one of those, broke, frustrated artists. And Toledo magically has, I think people like working with me. I think, I'm easy to get along with. I always deliver, I'm punctual, basic things like that, and that's something I got from all those years of working what I call quote unquote regular jobs.
Yeah.
And that has translated well into this. And, just my familiarity with this, my history with Toledo, my knowledge of the area, I think it all came together in such a beautiful way that I truly believe could not have happened anywhere else.
How did you? Well, first of all, I think Toledo gets a bad rep.
Of course
right?
it does.
But I think your photos really like bring out good things, right? And people love looking at photos. They're so if you can like just focus on these good things, or even if it's just the those beautiful pictures you take of just the skyline and sunset, all that kind of stuff is like, oh, Toledo is cool. It's good. There's a lot of good things happening. I think people need to understand that.
They do. And we're all living in the same place, but it's a matter of perspective. And I've got pride in this place because I see so much beauty and so many good things.
Yeah.
And I think pride's contagious, and I think people need to see it to believe it. So, people, every time we make the news, and I noticed this a lot when I was living in other places, every time Toledo makes the news, it's always for something crappy.
Yeah.
It's not anything that, like, oh, hey, yeah, that's us. You kind of like, oh, hand on your face, like, here we go again.
Yeah.
Somebody dove through the drive-through at McDonald's because they didn't have chicken nuggets and started a fight. We don't need that stuff. But that's what sells in the news. And I'm not the news. I don't work for the Blade. I don't work for the TV stations. I call myself alternative media, and there is a lot of good stuff here, and the world just needs to see it.
Yeah.
And I think your neighbors and my neighbors need to see it themselves and see it, thankfully, the way that I see it, and they'll start getting some pride. And if that can build, then it's limitless what the city can do.
For sure. How did you get your foot in the door with the Metro Parks? Because I guess anybody can take pictures, right? Anybody can go to Metro Park, take pictures. But how is it to where now they're like, hey, call Doug, we're gonna need him down here?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with, and I didn't know exactly what I was doing when I first did it, but I started taking photos of everything like I do, but making it a point to tag people. You know, if I'm going to take a photo of this area and it's got a business in the background, I'm going to tag them. And, you know, people started noticing that. And because I was spending so much time out in the metro parks and in downtown taking photos while I basically had the city and everything to myself because it's COVID, you know, there was Cindy Kerr, I think, was one of the first people. She was formerly with Connect Toledo. Now she's with Sunshine Communities over there in Maumee.
Okay.
But she really kind of liked what I was doing. Callie Herring over at Destination Toledo, which they're, you know, CVB is what people know them as, but they kind of noticed what I was doing and reached out to me and, you know, started featuring some of my photos on their thing. Well, there was an influencers meetup that they decided to have at the skeleton of what was soon to become the Glass City Metro Park Pavilion. And, you know, the place was mostly dirt otherwise, but they, you know, had a concrete pad and some poles going up. And I got invited out to this thing. And that's where I was given a tour by a gentleman we both know is Matt Killam.
Yeah.
And that was the first, I mean, for starters, I was wowed by him.
Yeah.
And just the way that he presented everything as we walked around and the way that he talked about it, you know, even though he had spent years away, he still had a relationship and a familiarity and a love of Toledo that just oozed out of him. And he just seemed bigger than life. And what I was seeing start to sprout up around me was reminiscent of, you know, Buffalo Bayou or Park in Houston, or, you know, Millennium Park in Chicago, you know, having these Grant Park, you know, having these giant, beautiful outdoor spaces that you can also see the skyline of the city from. And I was like, oh my gosh, those were my favorite things about those cities. And now Toledo is about to get its own. So I was hooked on the whole concept. I was hooked on the salesman. And I took some great pictures that night that, you know, as all the influencers stuff started to roll out over the next few days, I think mine kind of stood above. And, you know, I got the first panorama that anybody took down there at sunset. You know, I mean, there was a lot of firsts that I hit at that Glass City Metro Park. And a lot of it because I'm kind of camping out. I go over there all the time and I see, oh, look at that new thing. And of course nobody else has seen it because they just rolled it in that day. But that moment was really when it, you know, I ran into Chris Peterson there and I remembered her from, you know, 15, 20 years ago when I lived in Toledo the first time, getting drunk over at Mickey Finn's and everything. So she was out there. And so a lot of stuff started to click. I was like, wow, you know, look at the possibilities that this camera, you know, this, I wouldn't have been invited to this if it weren't for this camera and what I was doing with it. And that's when I realized how big of a potential this maybe had. And that's when I think the Metro Parks kind of got an idea that, hey, we like what this guy does, and he walks the walk with this.
Yeah.
So
and I think anyone who's fortunate enough to hear Matt like talk about the Metro Parks, anything in general, like I love just talking to him about whatever. We used to do that podcast together, the Metro Parks podcast together.
That's when I first found out about you.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So we used to do that together, and we used to tell each other like it was fun to do the podcast, talk to people, and being new to the Metro Parks, that's how I met a lot of people is through that podcast.
Oh, you got so many cool coworkers. Like,
yeah,
I mean, seriously, and I feel bad to everybody else, but I say this one with looking down and shaking my head a little bit, but the Metro Parks are my favorite people to work with, and they're the only people I can think of right now that I would even take a job from.
Oh, really?
But
wow.
That's how much I really enjoy this, and you know, I wouldn't change a thing right now. You know how it's going. It's beautiful. We're already, you know, planning a whole bunch of stuff for this year. I'm you know, was out at the Ice Ribbon yesterday. I'm going today. I'm going tomorrow evening. I mean, we're hitting the ground running this year, and I couldn't be any more excited. I love keeping this going, and I love being a part of all of this.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking for about 45 minutes. We haven't talked about your trip, and I do want to do that because I think it's important. It was really cool. Following you along on social media, and it was just probably a very small percentage of the pictures you took were popping up on social media. But first of all, how long were you planning this trip? Because you said it was 6,000 miles.
66, 65
Okay,
when
okay.
when all was said and done.
All right.
This trip I've been planning for since maybe a year after I lived in Houston.
Okay.
I've always had a romantic idea in my head, from old westerns up to modern things like Breaking Bad, where that color palette, the sights of the Southwest, the American desert, just really appealed to me. And living in Houston, in relative terms, it's right there. You know what I mean? You start getting out to West Texas, and the cactus and the tumbleweeds start popping up, and But I only made it as far as Austin and San Antonio, and so I had this in my mind that I'm gonna do that one of these days. I'm gonna when I get a couple weeks of when I get my 2 weeks of vacation after I've been at this place for over a year, which. Yeah, that's tough to do.
Yeah.
I'm gonna head out west and just take I-10 out to California and turn around and come back, and just for the fun of it, and just to see what I've always, will this stack up to this idea I've had in my head that this is, one of the most beautiful places in America, and I never did it when I was down there. Even for the last 2 years that I was there, that I, had quit drinking and things were, I didn't have the resources and the tools to really put things together. I was still kind of bouncing around like a pinball, and even though I wasn't hurting myself anymore, I didn't know where to go or what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a common theme of being lost and getting found down there. But so I left that on the table, and it's been eating at me ever since.
Sure.
I wanted to take that trip, and that's why on this road trip, everybody's like, "Why are you going to Houston?" I was like, because that's where I'm going to start, because old me didn't have the resources and the capabilities and the tools to pull this trip off. Doug today does. And I planned for this since last year, and I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to go start from there and give old me a little bit of grace, because he was trying.
Yeah. I think that's important. Like it is such a full circle thing. Like you're right. You were trying. You were trying. You were doing as best as you could do. I think you did at that point. You did the best. Like you saved yourself. You could have fallen way off this other way, and we wouldn't be sitting here, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it's important, and I think it's important, and it's cool that you went back to Houston and started it. And just to make, I'm assuming it's just like, man, this is it. Like I did it.
Yeah. I went and hung around with my 2 friends down there. I mean, I had a couple other that I would call, better than acquaintances, but I only really had 2 friends. And I went down and saw both of them and thanked them for being there for me in those times. And I still keep up with both of them. One of them is NBA basketball legend Chris Webber's first cousin.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that's how I first met him down there at the second place I lived in. I walked outside, and I saw a guy standing over at the next building and had a Detroit Tigers hat on. And I was like, "Oh, Tigers." And he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm from Detroit." And I was like, "We got to talk." And that's how I found, so we had that connection and everything. So yeah, his name's Linwood Weber, and he's a good dude. So
that's awesome.
I went and saw where I buried my last cat. I didn't have the money to get him. Well, I had money for alcohol,
sure,
but I didn't have money to go get him cremated. So I buried him in a park across the street from the worst apartment I ever lived in.
Wow.
Because that's all I could come up with.
Yeah.
But no, went and said goodbye to him and took the dog over there. She knew him then. I got her down in Houston.
Okay.
And I made a few things right in my heart before I technically, so I started that trip in Houston.
Yeah.
Even though I left from Toledo.
To me, like just meeting you just randomly in the Metro Parks, wherever we see each other, like it's nice to sit down and talk to you, because when you tell your whole story, it's I just thought there was a lot longer time, like you being sober, or like I even pictured like when you're talking about your dog, you're like, oh, that was like 2 dogs ago. Like but everything is it's sooner than I thought.
Everything has happened faster.
Yeah.
And even with this photography thing, and I go out of my way to show due respect to my peers that have been doing this for a long time. But I know plenty of people that have been, taking photos or doing video for 10, 20 years that haven't had the run that I've had in the past 2 years. I'm cognizant and aware of that, and I could not be any more grateful.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of my humility and trying to remain humble comes from, because I know how special this is, what's happening. And yeah, this has been very fast time period. I mean, think about that. 5 years ago, I'd been, sober for just over a year and got my first camera.
Yeah. It's very quick.
Yeah, so I'm aware of that, and that's how I know what I've got going on is special, and I'm on the right path, and that's where my drive and my motivation all comes from, is to not go back to where I was.
Yeah.
I've seen the bottom.
Oh, sure.
Not going back.
Yeah. So when you started in Houston, did you have it planned out like, okay, well, I'm going to these specific things to take specific pictures?
No, I basically had a route. I got on Google Maps, and I think it only lets you put like 8 stops in it.
Oh, really?
If you're
Okay.
planning it out. So I had to like kind of jump miles ahead, even though I thought, oh, maybe I'll go somewhere over there, because I needed to like bend the little blue line a certain direction. So it was a real rough draft, and I had basically, it was going to be I-10 straight out to San Diego, and then back up through northern Arizona and all in northern New Mexico and Oklahoma.
Okay.
And as I started going and got past Texas, when I woke up in the morning, I think I slept in El Paso the first or the second night that I was on the trip, and I got in, and it had been raining the whole night. And, it's 80-mile-an-hour highway and dark and trucks, and I was just stressed and tired by the time I got to that hotel, so I didn't check out El Paso at all. In the morning, we went nuts, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is what I was looking for. I was like, there's cactuses, there's these crazy cool bushes, there's rocks and mountains and the Mexico border, and like this. I was like, this is it. So let's get rocking. And I was so into it that right after we got done screwing around there, I mean, we attempted to climb a mountain that I probably got about 250 feet away from the summit, and I ended up having to turn around because the dog wasn't going to be able to get up there.
okay.
Like she was, I couldn't believe she got that far. And I started thinking, I was like, now you're going to be a jerk if you push this.
Yeah.
And, it was good enough. And, so it was neat, and it kind of helped, set a tone too, to remind me, like, you're not in flat, safe Ohio where you're going to fall off a rock 2 feet off the ground onto that nice, beautiful grass. This isn't a place where, the only stuff that can kill you need a microscope to see. Like, there's mountain lions and bears and, all the little creepy crawlies weren't out or anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that was a little bit, you know what I mean? Coyotes, which, we ended up dealing with later on in the trip. But there, I had to put a little bit more thought into everything. So we hit a gas station before we got out of town, and I was kind of scanning the map, and I saw white sands in New Mexico. My own history of loving outer space and things like that, I knew right off the bat. I was like, oh, that was the alternate landing site for the space shuttles. And I was like, and that's the white sands. I was like, that sounds cool. I was like, I've wanted to see this for a long time. I was like, it's real, it's right there, so let's do that.
Yeah.
So I drove there, and that put me up, in a third of the way up of New Mexico, and I was like, oh, well, I guess I've never been to Santa Fe or Albuquerque, and that's going way up north in New Mexico. So I was like, well, let me think about that. And I looked at the map, and I saw a place called Truth or Consequences.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, you know what? I want to go there just to say I've been to Truth or Consequences. So I had to go backwards an hour and go up another way. It meant I skipped Santa Fe, but I went to Albuquerque. And so now I'm up at a point where I thought that was going to be the end, the coming back part of my trip.
Yeah.
So I'm already adjusting on the fly. So I was like, well, I'm going to go west and get back down because I'm heading to Tucson and Phoenix and all of that. So Marissa Munoz, she used to work for the Metro Parks. She is the marketing manager down at the Wood County Museum now. And her husband is Zach Koloff, who works for Toledo Aerial Media. And she's a big national park geek like me. And she was like, oh my gosh, like, where are you going? And I was like, well, I see Crater on the map. And she's like, Crater stinks. She's like, it's a big crater. She's like, go to Petrified Forest.
It's a big crater.
Yeah, so I went to Petrified Forest National Park, and it was fantastic. And I was like, okay, we're definitely going to do Tucson, so it gives me a reason to go straight south.
Yeah.
And I ended up going through some of the coolest mountain and canyon. Like I wasn't going to the Grand Canyon, but I ended up seeing this amazing thing called White Mountain, and there was a Cedar Canyon running through it. And it was get down to Tucson, and oh my gosh, there's Saguaro National Park is right there. I came to see cactuses, and there's a whole national park of them. So I'm like, okay, I had no idea I thought I'd drive through Tucson. I didn't know I'd be spending the night there and checking that out.
I was just gonna say, at some point when you're like going to all these places, like You have to. I would imagine you have to tell yourself like, all right, I can't. We need to leave. I can't take any more pictures. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's the thing, and that's where I think I disappointed a lot of the people that were following me along the way because they're like, oh, you got to check out this or you got to check out that when it's already 2 hours behind me, or I'm like, yeah, I'm on 2 hours difference than you, and it's just getting dark in Toledo, so I've got 2 hours till it gets dark, but it's 3 hours to go to where you're suggesting, so. It's not going to work,
Yeah.
So there was a lot of on-the-fly time management, and there was like Phoenix. I had a friend that I've known since I was a little kid. Her name's Carrie, and her dad and my dad worked together, and she's lived in Phoenix for years, and so she had offered like rolled out the carpet like nobody else had. Like I'll show you around everywhere.
Oh, nice.
So I planned to do a couple days there.
Yeah.
But most of the rest of this I made up on the fly.
Wow.
And, after Phoenix, it just so happened that my sister, who lives in Virginia, was out for an ophthalmology conference in San Diego. So at the turnaround, I got to say hi to my sister and give her a hug. And, I had a friend that I met last summer here in Toledo. There was my friend Julie Blumecki. She lives in Atlanta, and she's a nationally celebrated poet. And she had an event up here at Switchboard. And one of the people that she invited to speak was this guy, Brian O'Hare from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It just so happened that same day I was out there, he was having a reading event at a bookstore out there. So I had somewhere to stop there. So there was all these little magical things happening along the way that
You're just like, this is where I'm supposed to be at this time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And had I say I'd gone to Meteor and talked to Marissa an hour later, and then she was like, that might have put me off a day or 6 hours, and then I wouldn't have rolled into San Diego just in time to see my sister, or wouldn't have got to LA literally like 10 minutes after his thing started. Had traffic been any worse, I might have missed it.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of this was meant to be, and it was a blast.
San Diego, I visited San Diego. One of my really good friends lives there. Actually, I'm going back this fall. I'm the officiant for his wedding, but it was awesome.
Isn't it cool?
Oh my gosh.
SoCal, I planned from the beginning I wasn't going to spend that much time there because I knew it really kind of deserved its own vacation.
Yeah.
So I was like, I could get lost in LA for a week. So if I give it the chance, I will. And so that's why I was like, I'm doing one day and evening there, and then in the morning we're heading to Joshua Tree and working our way out. So it was it definitely, I left a lot of stuff on the table, but I also covered a lot of ground and saw way more individual things than most people see on their vacation.
Yeah. That sounds is so awesome and also terrifying because my vacations have to be super planned. Like I couldn't just like drive and just like, well, we'll see what happens. Like I always feel like there has to be plan. I do make time, like if we do go on a vacation, like driving, I don't want to like we're driving and we see like something that says one of those like world's biggest picnic basket. Like, well, we got to see that, that kind of stuff. But like
that's what I build these around, giving myself enough time that anything that catches my eye, I can be like, oh, I'm gonna go there.
And how's your dog the whole time? Is
she had I brought up the coyote thing earlier.
Oh, yes,
when we were in Tucson, one of my things that I wanted to do, I had two things, photos that I wanted to get on this trip. I wanted to get the Milky Way with a saguaro cactus in the foreground, and then I wanted to get the Milky Way with a Joshua tree. Didn't get either of them.
Oh man.
Well, it's okay though. There's a dark sky park, an internationally recognized dark sky park, which means it's Toledo. The light pollution here is on a scale of 1 to 10 is like an 8.
Oh, wow.
This place was a 2, and 0 or 1 being the darkest, which is in the middle of the ocean where there's no man-made light. And so this park was right a little north of Biosphere 2, if you've ever heard of that thing. It was they made a movie called Biodome.
Yeah, I remember
so
that.
that was off of this University of Arizona experiment that they built out in the desert north of Tucson. Well, right north of that, there's Oracle State Park, and so they've got this dark sky park. So I was like, well, we're going to go up there, and I don't know if I'll be able to find a cactus, but we're going to get some stars and maybe get to check out this comet that's out there flying around right now. And so we went up there, and it was just me and the dog, and it was dark. Oh my God, it was probably like 10 o'clock, and it was so dark. Like literally you couldn't see your hand in front of your face dark. Wow. And so we set up on a road behind a barrier so nobody was going to drive into us that went back towards the dark sky park. I didn't have the gate code. Apparently I was supposed to call earlier in the day and arrange it. And I get out there and I'm like, it's locked, and I figured it out in front of the gate at 10 o'clock at night, and I was like, well, it's too late, so let's just park here and we'll walk back in. And so I set up out there, and bam, I got and you can see them on my Instagram and my Facebook. I got some amazing Milky Way photos, and I absolutely did get the comet. And it wasn't the greatest photo. It's a different comet than the one that was here a couple of years ago, but it's decent. And I was just so stoked because it's so cloudy up here. I haven't had a single opportunity for a month to check this thing out in Toledo, but there I did. And it was as I was getting really cold, I start hearing this howling.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh, there's coyotes out there. And they kept getting closer. And Elsa had been out just kind of, like she always does, she just kind of poking around in the bushes by the road and just smelling stuff and everything. And she came right back and stood right by me. And I was like, I'm cold and I think we got enough for now. So packed the stuff up and we started walking back out to the truck. And those howls started, I put a video up of it. Those howls started getting louder and louder. And she was scared to death. Sure. She jumped in that car and I was like, okay, we're going to get out of here. Again, another thing, like this isn't like Ohio. This is kind of serious out here. And it's not that millions of people don't do it every day, but they got their wits about them. Mm-hmm. So I had to get in that state. And, so she was not stoked about that. And then the next morning when I went to Saguaro National Park, we could hear gunshots off in the distance, and she doesn't like bangs. So she basically stayed in the truck the whole time. She was 9. The few times she got out, I think she got pricked by some cactuses. She just was having a bad time, and I was worried. For the sake of the whole trip, I was like, oh boy, I hope she has not hit her wall.
Oh, yeah.
But no, it was just a bad day. And when I got to Phoenix the next day, I was like, I got some time. I'm going to go out and test her out. We're going to go throw a tennis ball. We're going to go swimming. We're going to try doing all of her favorite things. If she does those with aplomb and enthusiasm, then she's okay. If she doesn't want to do those, then I got a problem halfway through this trip. She was happy as could be. And
nice. We
we had really no incidences for the rest of the trip.
So how long? How many days in total were you gone?
13.
Okay. All right.
And we like I told you, I left it open where I could have extended it a little bit longer, but I set this interview as my got to be back by that date. So you were what helped bring me back to reality. So it was long trip. The longest road trip I'd taken prior to this was I think 4,150 miles. So. This was another 2,500 miles past that, and that was probably as long as I'd want to go without having maybe a camper or something. Yeah, because it was going to start getting expensive doing a hotel thing and all that. Because I'd originally planned on camping. I had a tent in the bag or sleeping in the car, and not one night anywhere I was at was it above 40, 45 degrees. So it was cold, and I was like, I only did that one night in northern Texas, and I was like, I'm not doing this again. So so it ended up being a lot of hotels and everything. But so I mean that's that. But that's what happens with winging it,
Yes, 100%.
Gotta be prepared.
Well, Doug, thanks for coming on here, man. This was awesome. I appreciate you, opening up and telling us about your life story and the trials and tribulations you've gone through. And obviously, you're in a good spot now, and you've learned from all that. And I'm sure as bad. I even talked to my mom about it. As bad as it was, or as bad as you thought it was, or see it like, you're at something, and it sounds weird. You're probably glad you went through certain parts of this because you wouldn't be where you're at now, or you wouldn't have the mindset you have now. But again, I appreciate you opening up and telling us all those. And again, I'll have your website, Dougiefreshphoto.com. That'll be in the show notes. I'll put your Instagram in there too, so people can see all those pictures.
Facebook now after 11 years.
Oh, do you really? So. Okay, all right. I'll put all those links in there. People can click on them. Before we go, I do want to thank Fort Meigs CrossFit for allowing me to use their space. Check out their website, fortmeigscrossfit.com. Thanks again, Doug, and I appreciate all the work you do for the Metro Parks too. You're always out there. You're a champion for us.
It's joy, man.
And we love it. Yeah. Well, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks everybody for checking out this episode of the Nerdball podcast. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're hearing this, on any of the podcatchers, on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We're coming at you 2 times a week now, audio and video. Check us out on all the social medias. Just search the Nerdball podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're out there. Gmail is the nerdballpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to shoot us an email, we'd be happy to get back to you. Thanks to Real JP Multimedia, Cuttlefish Graphics, Perrysburg Junior High STEM Lab, and Big Daddy Graphics for helping out the podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.